Talking all things Fayetteville Regional as the Arkansas Razorbacks begin their trek to Omaha, Nebraska. That is the goal, at least. Our good friend Andrew Ellis of Natty State Sports. Also, guys, he is the host of the Bombastic podcast, which is arguably the best place. In my opinion, it is the best place to get your Arkansas baseball fix. Again, our good friend Andrew Ellis. He joins the show once again. Andrew, what's going on, man? Great to see you and hear from you once again. And by the way, this is your first time on the air since you called the Musclemen to Southern Cal. I want to give you your roses for that, my friend. In case you guys missed it, back in early February, I think it was, Andrew, we had you on. You had mentioned, hey, this just might happen after the season's over. And, I mean, sure enough, man, who knew John Calipari? Who knew that was going to be the answer?
Me,
at that
I
time?
had it all mapped out. But you know what's funny is, like, it wasn't even something that I was, like, tracking. You know, like, I'd kind of forgotten that I'd said that. You know, because mostly if people are doing basketball interviews with Natty State, they're calling the pot at the Palace guys. They're calling Curtis and Scotty. And so they're the ones who are like going out on a limb week to week, really trying to like predict how that thing would play out. And then once it did, I was like, I feel like I may have said that at one point. So I had forgotten I had bookmarked it when you tweeted it out. Cause I was like, you know, just an off chance. I'll keep this just in case. And like, sure enough, worked out that way. But man, what a crazy offseason. The basketball, Arkansas basketball was the talk of kind of still is the talk of the town as with DJ Wagner come in recently. Yeah, what a roller coaster that's been. And I'm anticipating this college baseball postseason roller coaster is going to be just as wild. But man, I can't wait to cover it. I can't wait to be there this weekend at Bomb. We're ready to get it going up in Fayetteville, man. It's a tense atmosphere, as it always is with baseball. Like, everyone hates their team going into the postseason. I know in South Carolina they hate their team. It's just a thing. It's just you just hate your baseball team going into the postseason. So we're gonna find out if you know they can do something special. But in Fayetteville, it's like everyone's excited, but there's also like a dark cloud hanging over where it's like there's a good chance that we're not gonna be the team that wins this. In which case we're gonna be angry. And so it's like people are already like pre-mad, but it is what it is. You know, they're not going to get that way until you get that monkey off your back and just win the title. So I don't see why Arkansas won't just go ahead and do it right now.
Andrew, that's a great place to start. As we look at the Fayetteville Regional, again, Arkansas is the 5 overall national seed. They draw Southeast Missouri State, Kansas State, and Louisiana Tech. But you mentioned the overall vibe right now and the mood of the fan base, and I've seen it on social media as well, that there's almost – you know, going into this regional, there's a confidence, but there's also a nervousness, right? And it feels like, even like with the SEC tournament, for example, which the SEC tournament matters. But if you're a team like Arkansas, who's already, won the SEC West, had a great year, locked up your standing as a top 8 national seed, I still see people kind of finding things to complain about or be upset about. Dave Van Horn isn't clutch. He's this, he's that. What's the overall mood? I mean, you talked about it again after the week in Hoover where, Arkansas didn't have a great week, but again, it's not like it's the end of the world. It's not the big postseason. I saw Hagen Smith post on his Instagram, it's go time, right? So now it's time for the real thing. But like you mentioned the mood, like what is the mood right now, Arkansas fans? Again, a really confident group, but it definitely seems there's some uneasiness there as well.
Well, so it's very weird with this Arkansas baseball program because if you look at it over the last 7 years, literally no one in college baseball has won more games. And whether that's SEC play, just overall tournament games, like Arkansas has had as much success as any program in the country. But of course, they don't have that big, elusive national title. And so it's like in a lot of, across the country, people probably have more respect for Arkansas than their own fans do at times. Because there's a lot of fans who are in that mode, especially like more casual ones that are like, well, you do all this in the regular season, but you don't win in the postseason. So what that does is kind of ruin the regular season because then it's like, hey, we won 20 SEC games. Doesn't matter. You got to win in the postseason. Oh, well, we didn't have as good of a regular season. Well, you better win in the postseason. It doesn't, no matter what you do, it's kind of a lose-lose. So I think everyone's really obsessed with this idea of peaking at the right time. I think that's the thing people like us always say. You hear coaches, players say it. And so I think when people get really frustrated over SEC tournament, particularly like Arkansas fans or other fans who had situations locked up, like A&M didn't play particularly well there. I'm sure their fans are a little bit upset too. It's not as much, to me, at least, about what actually happens in Hoover. It's like you just want to feel like your team is peaking at the right time. I just got back from a beach trip with a bunch of LSU fans who are convinced that their team is peaking at the right time. They're like, it doesn't matter. We're ready to roll. It's postseason, and now we look great. So I think a lot of fans just would prefer to see that visual in Hoover. But, at the end of the day, getting home early from Hoover is not the worst thing in the world. I think we've kind of learned that over the course of the last decade or so. But, we'll see how it is. I mean, it is kind of just a fascinating sport where it's such a large sample size of a regular season. Pretty much all of it doesn't matter now. It's just time to roll. It's go time, like Hagen Smith said. It's like there's just so much pressure, intense energy around this Arkansas baseball program. But that's the way you want it. I mean, Dave Van Horn has spoken about this publicly a lot, where he's like, we would much rather our fans be nutty than them just not care at all, and to be clear, Arkansas fans are a little bit nutty, but, who isn't in the SEC? I mean, it's just kind of how it is.
So, Andrew, you mentioned you want your team to be peaking at the right time. And if Arkansas gets hot, I could argue there's nobody better in college baseball. There were ups and downs. I think the offensive side we sort of expected, but I was surprised to see with the pitching staff, there were ups and downs. What's the status of both sides of the baseball, offensively, defensively? Where do you feel like this team is at right now? And are there concerns? Are there things you feel better about? Like, how do you evaluate this Arkansas club going into this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, going into the season, Arkansas's preseason top 3 everywhere. Everyone kind of knew about Hagen Smith. They knew about Brady Tiger. They knew Mason Molina and like a few other these arms that they expected to be good. And, there's some names in the lineup, like a Kendall Diggs, a Peyton Stovall, where people were familiar. So it was kind of everyone viewed Arkansas as a pretty well-rounded team for the most part. About 3 weeks into the season, it became obvious, okay, this pitching staff is special. This lineup is not as good as we thought it was going to be. I think that was kind of the take early on, and Arkansas was winning a lot of games regardless. So it wasn't like an issue, but they were winning a lot of 5-3, a lot of 4-2, a lot of having to come from behind, and things looked a little weird offensively. But they were winning a lot of games, but a lot of people were really underwhelmed with the offense. And then now here lately in the last few weeks, you've seen some of that pitching come back down to earth a little bit. Brady Tigers really struggled. Mason Molina's gotten it going here lately, but he was banged up for a while, struggled there for a minute. Bullpen had some sketch. They had to move some roles around there on the pitching staff. But the offense has been a little bit better, but it's been harder to enjoy it because, they gave up like 15, 16 runs in 2 games in Hoover, which, I'm not going to make too much of a big deal about. But I do think that it was kind of like fans are in a little bit of a box where they're like, all right, we're seeing a little bit of offensive progress, but not enough. And this all-world pitching staff, is it still that? Many are kind of on edge about that. But ultimately, for me, it comes down to Arkansas is Hagen Smith. It's facing Arkansas in game 1 against Hagen Smith. That might be the toughest singular game matchup in the country. And obviously, I cover Arkansas, so maybe that's just me viewing it through that lens. But I think nationally, most people would agree Hagen Smith is one of, if not the top arm in the country. And just with this program and Dave Van Horn and being at Baum-Walker Stadium especially, it's going to be really hard to beat that team. So, I mean, this weekend, whether it's Louisiana Tech, Kansas State, I don't see them beating Kansas State. I don't see Virginia, Mississippi State next week beating Hagen Smith. So when you're playing Arkansas, you pretty much are down 0-1. It's a really tough to mentally prepare for that. And then I think, some of these other arms that have kind of been disappointing Arkansas here lately are still older arms that you count on, like a Mason Molina, who had success in the postseason last year at Texas Tech. Gage Wood is a guy who's been coming on here lately and throwing some, giving them some decent starts, some length, and he might be a little bit of an X factor there. Arkansas has plenty of older guys. They have more talent than they know what to do with as a pitching staff, and that's kind of what wins this time of year. So these next 2 weeks at home, I think Arkansas might have to lean on their offense a little bit more. But at Baum-Walker Stadium, they've done a little bit better. I mean, they're 33-3 at home. So even that mediocre offense hasn't been that much of a problem at Baum-Walker Stadium. But if this team's going to win a national title and really make a run, they're going to need both things to be pretty elite at the right times. And that's just kind of how this thing works. On paper, it seems like Arkansas has the pitching staff to win in Omaha. I mean, they're kind of set up to do it. They have the depth. Hasn't exactly looked that way the last couple of weeks. Part of that was just playing A&M. Part of that was experimenting with some arms in Hoover a little bit. But I think Hog fans would certainly love to see their pitching staff return to form a little bit this weekend. And let's get the sticks going a little bit. It's warm. Ball should be flying at Baum-Walker this weekend. Let's get the sticks going.
Yeah, Andrew, the way the ball was flying out in Hoover, you have to imagine, again, this postseason is going to be crazy when it comes to long ball. You mentioned, though, I want to jump into the regional itself. You mentioned Hagen Smith. You talked about Louisiana Tech. You talked about Kansas State. Arkansas's got Southeast Missouri on Friday afternoon. Do you expect Dave Van Horn to save Hagen Smith for that game 2 instead of game 1? And what's your feelings on that philosophy? Because I know some people that They like to play kind of the cat and mouse game or the chess match, if you will, and let's save our best arm. We can beat this team with our second or third guy. And there's some people I talk to that they're, hey, throw your best available when they're available because tomorrow is not promised. Like, how would you approach that, and what do you expect Arkansas to do?
Well, Dave is not super consistent on this. Like, he doesn't have like one foolproof method that he's going to do every year. Like, they've kind of mixed it up. Like, I remember he threw Blaine Knight game 1 in 2018. I don't know what led to that decision. It just kind of was a thing. But he saved Isaiah Campbell for game 2 in 2019, and it probably saved them the regional. Saved Patrick Wicklander in 2021. And I believe last year he saved Hagen Smith, and then he just lost to TCU, which Arkansas will not be losing to TCU this postseason. Can confirm that. But so he's shown that like he will save his ace if he feels like that's the best chance to give his team to win the regional. And when we were talking to him yesterday in the press conference, he didn't commit to a plan. He was like, "Well, we'll have to go look at the numbers and do all that." I'm sure they have an idea in their mind of who they're going to start, but I don't expect it to be Hagen Smith, and I think that's the right call too. The way I kind of view it is, everyone says like, oh, you can't lose your first game. Well, it's like you can't really lose your second game either. If you start 1-1, you're in trouble. Regardless of what order you started in 1-1. Like, and so it's funny you mentioned that tomorrow's not promised. Well, in a double elimination, it kind of is promised a little bit. So it's like not that you want to lose to a 4 seed, but I think if you can't beat a 4 seed with whether it's Brady Tigert, Gage Wood, Mason Molina, or whoever, or even Ben Bybee, who's been making some starts here for Arkansas, if you can't beat Southeast Missouri State with your kind of your secondary arms, you probably weren't going to make a deep run anyway. And so I just feel like, the game 2, that 1-0 game is like 80% of the time, like that's when the regional is decided, in my opinion. And I think historically, if you look at like the numbers of it, whoever wins that game wins the regional at a pretty high rate. So I would love to have my guy ready for that. Plus, you never know what these other teams are going to do. Like I mentioned 2019, I remember TCU that year had a Nick Lodolo, who was a top 10 pick, and they were a 3 seed. So it was like he was kind of like their entire team, and they saved him for the Arkansas game. They had to play a 2 seed, but they saved him for that, and it worked out for them. And then I think Isaiah Campbell ended up beating him like 2-1. So it's like, thank God Arkansas saved their ace. So I just, me personally, I would rather have my guy going against the best team possible, because you shouldn't really need him against the 4 seed. Now, I know Paul Skeens threw like 130 pitches against Tulane last year, and it worked out for them. But I just think with this Arkansas team, and frankly, how dependent they've been on Hagen Smith to beat good teams lately, I think you want him against the best team possible.
Andrew, let's talk specifically the regional as a whole. Louisiana Tech, Kansas State, Southeast Missouri, like I mentioned. What did you think of the draw when you first saw it? And now that what you know about these teams, I'm sure you guys have done a deep dive or will do a deep dive this week. But based off what you know about these teams, did you feel like it was a favorable draw for Arkansas? Did you feel like it was a little bit of a tougher draw? And some of the challenges, I mean, what you know, again, about Tech, Kansas State, Southeast Missouri, you look at the numbers, some pretty good teams, especially Louisiana Tech, who has been a really good historical program.
So I want to be careful with how I word this. Baseball is a weird game. Like anything can happen. And frankly, when you're in the NCAA tournament and you're having to go through this format, you're never going to get an easy draw. You're never going to have a weekend where it's like, oh, we're just going to go through. We're going to win 3 straight games here, and we're not even going to worry about it.
More manageable. I'll phrase it that way.
Right.
More
no,
manageable.
100%. And so I'm with you. Like I'm kind of like when I saw it, that was kind of my first reaction. If I'm being honest, I was sitting there on my couch like cakewalk, easy. But the more I look at it, the more I'm like, okay. This is these are solid teams like Louisiana Tech, like you mentioned. Lane Burroughs has done a freaking hell of a job. So I went to school at Louisiana Tech, so I've got a little bit of a connection there. And their best player, Ethan Bates, one of the best 2-way players in the country, Arkansas, also started his career at Arkansas. Transferred out because of a guy named Peyton Stovall. So it's kind of funny to see how his career has played out. In my opinion, now this may be a controversial take or not. I would much rather play the mid-major that is overachieved rather than the high major team that is underachieved, which I think TCU last year was like the prime example of that. And I'd say LSU is an example of that this year. You could even make an argument for a few other SEC teams that are like clearly like Florida. Who has more talent than Florida? Maybe 5 teams in the country. Facing them in the regional seems a lot more frightening than facing like even a Dallas Baptist, who is a really good program, historical power. But it's like you would imagine Arkansas would have a little bit of a talent edge over Louisiana Tech, over Dallas Baptist, some of these other programs. And so personally for me, like I would just much rather face a team like a Louisiana Tech. Now, Louisiana Tech fans, if you win this regional and want to dunk on me, do it. Congrats. Like I'll love all for it. But I'm just saying, like, when you're talking about draws, I would much rather this one. And Kansas State, no disrespect, it seemed like they were one of the last teams in the tournament. Seems like they've lost to just about every good team they've played so far. I'll be interested to see what they do this weekend. And SEMO, there's a lot of familiarity. Really, there's a lot of familiarity with all these programs. I mean, Dave and Lane Burroughs cross paths. So they've coached against each other, coached with each other. Arkansas played them in a 3-game series last year, 2021, 2019. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say they're probably playing in a 3-game series next year too. SEMO, Arkansas plays them like year in, year out. They didn't play them this year, but they played them in a 4-game series a couple years ago. So it's like these coaching staffs know each other. It's truly a regional, which, like, this particular season, I'm not going to complain about just because the regional worked out in Arkansas's favor. But I look around the country, like I look at Tennessee and I'm like, man, their path to Omaha sucks. Like, that doesn't look as fun as, most teams. Like, when you're the number 1 overall seed, like, you should have a little bit of a cakewalk there. And their trouble's more in the super regionals. But, I just kind of look around and nobody has an easy draw. There's nobody that I look at where I'm like, they're not going to have to stress at all. But I just compare what Arkansas is about to face to some of these other teams. And I feel pretty good about where Arkansas stands and kind of, how it shakes up, even against regionals that they've had at Baum-Walker here in the last few years.
Andrew, what's the key to the weekend for you for Arkansas and the X factor player, the guy that needs to step up and have a big weekend for the Hogs to advance?
So offensively, I'm going to go Vahiva Aloy. He is the most polarizing offensive player for Arkansas because if you catch him on the right day, you would think he's literally like Derek Jeter on steroids and the best shortstop ever. I mean, he's hitting nukes. I think his batting average is right around 270, but he leads Arkansas in home runs, leads Arkansas in RBI. Like, they need him to be a big-time run producer, which he is fully capable of being, but he's also fully capable of having those 0-for-4, 3 strikeout games and swinging and missing a little bit. And so he's coming off a little bit of a rough weekend there in Hoover, but I feel like when he gets going, this offense the ceiling is much higher. So I'm looking forward to seeing how he plays on this postseason stage. He's also not draft eligible, but he's a sophomore. If he has a loud statement this postseason, I think you're going to start hearing him as a potential first-round pick next summer. So I really look forward to seeing him play on this stage. But on the pitching staff, I mentioned Gage Wood earlier. I think he's kind of the X factor there because you've got older guys like a Tiger Molina, and Will McIntyre is another older guy that has pitched a lot for Arkansas that has been struggling a little bit. And they've got a lot of really talented young guys like a Gage Wood, like a Gabe Gackle, Christian Fouch. I feel like Gage Wood is kind of the perfect mixture of like young talent and older guy that they can count on. It would be really nice to see him take that next step here in this postseason. He's had some really encouraging performances here lately as a starter, as a closer, as a reliever. I think he could be called on to start game 1 of this regional, frankly. Like, I think that's very possible. I think he could start game 3. I could also see him closing games. So it's like, I think whatever his role ends up being, he's going to be asked to get some huge outs for Arkansas. And if he becomes a little bit more stable of an option, I feel a lot better about this Arkansas pitching staff overall. So those are the 2 guys that I feel like the most pressure is on their shoulders this weekend, other than Hagen Smith, who they're basically counting on to go throw a perfect game.
Andrew, can't wait to see it all unfold, see how the Hogs fare in the Fayetteville Regional this weekend. Andrew Ellis and Natty State Sports, the Bombastic Podcast, does a fantastic job talking all things Hogs. Andrew, let folks know where they can find all your work.
Yeah, so I got my Twitter name is stupid. I had to switch it when we made this move, and now it's Ellis Andrew with an underscore, and it's really impossible for anyone to find. So many people reach out to me.
I have noticed that as well, by the way. I meant to tell you that. I don't know why that is, but yeah, I'm
like shadow banned on Twitter. I don't know what it is. I think it's because I'm so rebellious, and they know that I'm a problem. So maybe that's what it is. So if you follow me on Twitter, like, you're a part of an exclusive.
Damn you, Elon.
Damn you. That. But you mentioned the Bombastic Podcast. My girlfriend made me this awesome hat, which I like.
Love it.
So the Bombastic Podcast has its own YouTube channel separate from the Natty State Sports feed. So if there's any Arkansas fans out there that love baseball and they love Natty State Sports, make sure you subscribe to both channels because we have that issue every now and then. But other than that, man, Natty State, we're all over social media. Curtis and Scotty, those guys are doing a great job. And John Neighbors, as always. We got a lot of exciting stuff coming up here, man. So I appreciate you having us on. And we're looking forward to covering. Hopefully we'll see everyone in Omaha.
Andrew, appreciate you taking the time, man. Let's definitely do it again soon.
Absolutely, man. Maybe I'll see you in Omaha, right?
Maybe. You might see me there. Let's do it.